Hi guys, we just want to share with you our thinking process and what we did to decide on which country we would go to for IVF. We were in the unfortunate situation, we're from Colorado, USA. They just passed a bill to cover fertility care for families, but it doesn't go into effect for 2 years, and I am 44 years old. So we need to get the show on the road as far as our fertility. And so what we decided to do is go with donor egg IVF after an elimination process. And what we found out was that donor egg IVF in other countries can be about 10 times less expensive than having it done locally where we live. And also, that includes travel expenses.
Yep.
So another thing that was a big motivator for us to travel internationally, which is like really scary and feels...
Yeah, it's definitely a level of uncomfortability.
And uncertainty. But one of the things we were getting into back home is that the wait list for a donor egg was so long. We finally had settled upon CNY Fertility in New York because they had a wonderful package for $9,000 or $12,000 that suited us really fine, and we would have paid that amount for donor egg IVF, except the wait list for a donor is about a year. And being 44 years old, we just don't have the luxury of time to hang out and then have it fall through after we wait a year. So going to another country means that there are donors ready, willing, and able to help us out right away. And I think those were our two main reasons for getting brave and traveling to get our IVF done. So you're meeting us when we're about halfway through our journey, because we've arrived in our destination country, but we actually haven't done the procedure yet, so we'll update you when we get through. But right now we just wanted to kind of share with you the most important things that helped us make a decision on which country to go with. There's a really good website called Donor Egg Friends, and I feel like we got a lot of good information from them, a really good overview.
It gave you a good breakdown of the different countries and kind of what their reputations were, and some of the just basic facts about their IVF numbers and success rates.
Mm-hmm. I was finding that there was some difference in success rates. It wasn't huge. Like for donor egg IVF, the success rate ranges from about 60% to about 80%, and that's about it. And that's worldwide. But something you have to call into question is how do they report their numbers, and what agencies do they go through, and is it legit? Do they really tell themselves if they have failures, or are they kind of fluffing up their numbers so they look good? So those are just, you have to kind of look at the corruption index for the country you're looking at too, to kind of know if their reputation is good or what's up with that. So the Donor Egg Friends website just really helped us narrow things down because it helped us know legalities in different countries. So one of the things you'll want to think about is, do you need to know the sex of your child or the gender? And so some countries do allow gender selection, I know Cyprus and Greece, and lots of countries allow gender selection. Even in the USA, they allow gender selection, but other countries do not allow it. Czech Republic was one that did not allow gender selection, but we didn't care, so we went with it. The next thing is obviously cost. He is Latino, and what we decided is that we would be totally great with going to South or Central America, and we looked at countries like Mexico, and we looked at also Panama was a really good country for IVF, but they were charging $10,000 for their donor egg IVF, which I would have gladly taken a Latina donor. I would have loved that because it would have matched my husband. But the cost ended up being the same as the USA. But on the plus side, if we went to South or Central America, we'd be in the same time zone. And so the travel would be really short, and adjusting to the time zone would have been really cool. But then there's other things you need to look at, tropical illnesses like Zika virus and other things like that played into our decision. What else was a high priority for you?
Just making sure if they had any guarantees, how many embryos they usually produced on average, and their overall haul of how many eggs they retrieved from the donors. So things like that.
So after doing some research, what we found out is that the practices in the USA are really different than elsewhere in the world as far as how they retrieve eggs from a donor or from even the person undergoing IVF. So the strategy in the USA, and this is like, this, I'm no expert, so, you know, this is just my understanding, is that they super stimulate the person who's going to give up the eggs, and then they collect a lot of eggs, like between 20 and 50 eggs. But if you collect like more than 30 eggs, apparently they're just turds. Like they're not good eggs. They're just like, it's just like squeezing out eggs before they're mature or ready. And so you end up with like kind of the same amount of good ones anyway, as if you didn't hyperstimulate and you collected only like 15 to 20. So the European approach, it seems to be that they don't hyperstimulate and go nuts on the medications for the donor who's donating eggs. They only collect like 15 to 20 eggs, but they have a higher rate of success with those smaller clutch of eggs. So that's just something to look at also. We are told by several specialists that you kind of don't really want eggs from a person who gave 50 eggs in one session because of that reason, that more of them are like not really fully cooked, if you know what I mean.
And the other thing they said to consider was whether or not the person had already been successful in a pregnancy, whether by themselves or through surrogacy.
Or donation. Yeah. So that's like something to look at. Does the clinic you're going to, do they let you know about the donor? So we're going to make a separate video too about how we decide on the clinic. And that's like super important, is like how they choose the donor and what criteria they use. Okay, so moving on. So, like cost was a huge, like I'm sure it was our number one factor. If cost wasn't important, we wouldn't even be looking at IVF abroad. Like we would just
do it in the States.
Yeah, we just go down the street, like where we live and in Colorado, and like get it done there, because they're just fine. Their practice is what they do there. Except for us, we are looking at $40,000 to $60,000 per cycle, and a huge wait list. So we were like, nay, and decide to go abroad.
Right.
Okay, so we've talked about time zones. One of the clinics that was so beautiful that we looked at is in Barbados. But for us, like the time zone difference was so far, and the flight was like something crazy, like 14 hours, that we just decided that that wasn't a good fit for us, because the cost versus the cost of the flight were two things that I looked at in combination. So like, yeah, it's wonderful if like the cost of the donor egg IVF is only $5,000, but if the flight to get there is $4,000, then you kind of might as well stay home.
Then you don't save any money, really.
So. Yeah, so just like we definitely like did a spreadsheet, because we're those people, and we made a spreadsheet of like the cost of the flight for the country and the range of cost of the IVF packages.
Right.
And then also like the extras, like is it customary in that country to include extras, or do they charge you more for it? For instance, medications for your egg donor, do they include it, or is it extra typically, you know, because like you'll kind of notice certain trends in certain countries.
I think we also had any guarantees they might provide on the list.
So we'll talk about guarantees really quick here. But a guarantee is not a guarantee is not a guarantee, because like...
It's in the fine print.
Yeah. So some of them, they guarantee to harvest a certain number of eggs. Well, yeah, but if they all die in the lab, then what good are those eggs to you? So you have to kind of think about that. Like if they say they're guaranteed to harvest at least 5 eggs or 8 eggs or 12 eggs, like that's something. It's better than nothing. Because like we haven't found many places in America that offer any guarantee. Although there's that South Carolina place, but they're a little more expensive, but they did offer like a guarantee. So look for places with guarantees, because it's cool and it's becoming more affordable. But what we found was that some guarantee like a certain number of eggs harvested. Well, those aren't like turning into babies yet.
Yeah.
The next was like they might guarantee blastocysts, but like for instance, we looked at one clinic called Genet in Prague, and they guaranteed 2 blastocysts, but they were only 3 days old. Okay, but a lot of blastocysts or embryos die between the 3rd day and the 5th day of cultivation. And so we were looking for a clinic that offered a guarantee on day 5. That was really important to us.
5 was the day that we really narrowed down on, and like it had to have a 5-day guarantee.
because what's the point of like paying this huge amount and getting, you know, a third day blastocyst and then they all die and then on day 5 you have none, which we read stories like that.
Yeah.
So the clinic that we ultimately chose guaranteed 2 blastocysts that were healthy on day 5 of cultivation. Some other guarantees that we saw out there were they might like give you half off your next cycle, or a third cycle or a fourth cycle for free if you know, if things didn't work out. I saw a clinic in Spain called Juana Crespo, and the Juana Crespo clinic, I think they guaranteed 4 blastocysts by day 5 of cultivation, which was like astounding. But they were also more expensive, and we just decided that we would be okay with 2 blastocysts for a much lower expense.
Do you want to quickly explain what you mean by cycles too?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
That kind of confused me as well, but cycles meaning like however many embryos that they get out of the clutch of eggs that you have. That all those eggs you can use multiple cycles. You can come back and get if you get like 3, for example, you can come back 3 times. It's not having to go back and get another donor and start the process over again. So that's important to kind of know too.
Yeah, so for example, so you have this donor, and let's say they're able to get 12 gorgeous, beautiful, healthy eggs from your donor for your family. And let's say they cultivate them out and only 6 survive as quality embryos to day 5 of cultivation. Well, what you can do is on your first visit, those fresh embryos were made using your partner sperm or donor sperm, and you can put 1 embryo or 2 into your body and go home, and maybe you're pregnant or maybe you're not. But what they do with the remaining 5 embryos is they vitrify them and freeze them, and then you can come back every couple of months and have more put in until you get pregnant. So if you put in 1 at a time, that would allow you 6 visits on that single donor egg clutch of eggs. Does that make sense? Let's say you put in all 6. Let's say you go crazy and put in 2 at a time because you really want to get this done fast and that you want to undertake the risk of twins. And so let's say you put in 2 at a time, you'd have 3 chances if you had 6 good embryos to do that. But once you run out of your 6 embryos, then you would need to pay for an additional cycle. So another thing that we looked at very carefully was we wanted to know what would be the cost for the return of the frozen embryo transfer. It's usually notated as FET. So the first cycle is getting your clutch of eggs and fertilizing them with the sperm, and then you get 1 or 2 put in, and then you freeze the leftovers. And then you go through the leftovers until those are used up, and then you need to purchase another cycle.
Right. So
the rate for most women with a donor egg cycle, and it's different when you have IVF with your own eggs. If I'd used my 44-year-old eggs, there was a 75% chance that we would miscarry every time we put one in. So we decided to go with the eggs from a 22-year-old, let's be real. We knew that we would have, like, if we get more than 1 embryo, we'd have leftovers and be able to return again. And most women with a donor egg cycle get pregnant on the 2nd visit to the clinic. Either the first time they put in the embryo, you have like a 60 to 80% chance of it taking. And when you return again, you're up to about like 93% of women become pregnant on by the second visit. 93% of women undergoing donor egg IVF are pregnant. So the odds are really in our favor that we wouldn't need a 3rd visit or a 2nd cycle. But if they discount the 2nd cycle by 50%, that would be pretty cool if they were willing to do that, because that would really help with your expenses.
Yep. Another thing to think about, if you do get a lot of eggs or a lot of embryos, I should say, is they do have limits pretty much in all the countries about how many embryos they will put in at a single time. So you think it was either 2 or 3 depending on the country. So if you got 6, for example, you wouldn't be able to put them all in at once. You'd be limited to either 2 or 3 at a time.
So another thing that we would just add about choosing which country that you want to go to is you'll want to know if they show you pictures of your donor. And so I'm not going to lie, like, we're very easy about who our donor was. In both of our families, we're very diverse. We have people of all hair colors, eye colors, stature, short, tall, like all different builds. So we knew that pretty much like a lot of people would fit into our family structure, like no matter who our donor was. And we were very laid back. I wasn't really attached to the idea that she had to have a certain education or like, we're just pretty open about who our donor was. So not seeing pictures of our donor was something we could live with. And in Czech Republic, we were not able to see pictures of our donor. But for example, in Ukraine, you can see pictures of your donor. But there was like a crazy story that we heard about the Ukraine that made us turn away from going there. There's also like a little bit of political unrest right now. But the story that turned me away from Ukraine, it was a much better deal. Like you could get, it was like half the cost of Czech Republic, which we had ultimately decided on. But the stories that I heard was that people would get like really attached to a donor and they'd be like, okay, that's the donor that we want. And they'd pick her out and the clinic would be like, okay, she's ready to go. And like the people would plan their trip and book their tickets and they'd be on their way to the Ukraine. And then the clinic would say, you know what? The donor that you picked, she wants to drop out and she wants another like 1,500 euros. Yeah. And if you don't give that, then we're going to cancel your cycle. So like I heard a lot of those kind of like yucky stories.
It's pretty sketchy at times.
Yeah, so you want to make sure that the country you're choosing isn't too sketch as far as like the laws and stuff like that. And something that was important to me is like I know there's no guarantees, but like the idea of human trafficking and like people being forced to do a procedure is terrifying. And I know that I know enough to know that I don't know enough about it. Yeah. But the reputation of the country is either good for human trafficking or it's not good, and that played into our decision to not go to certain countries for our choice of clinic for our IVF. We already talked about gender, how some countries do allow gender, so you'll want to know if that's a thing. And just generally, like, is it customary for that country to have like all these add-on costs? So we also heard that some countries, like their pricing was very, very low, but once you got there, they would like charge you extra for like an administration fee and a collection fee.
500 for this, 1,000 for that.
A lab fee and like all this stuff. So another thing that helped us choose is we wanted a country where like it had the reputation of the price is the price and they don't nickel and dime you with add-ons. And we liked clinics where they posted their price list on their website. And there's a few clinics that were very good. Ultimately, the one we chose doesn't post their price on their website because their price was a bit lower than everybody else's, but they were very fast and sent us a price list overnight when we asked. So it was pretty transparent. And they also said on their documentation, we do not add on, like the price is the set price.
And they all have like additional testing, the types of things that you can do. So it's not that none of the clinics won't give you options, but some of them, things that are included in the actual cycle, they actually try and separate and add charges into that.
Another thing too that can help you decide which country to use for your clinic is how much do the medications cost there. So because I'm a donor egg recipient, my medication costs weren't as high as someone who's going through IVF. And our country that we chose, which was Czech Republic, they typically, traditionally the package price doesn't include my medications. My medications should have cost us, if we bought it from an overseas pharmacy with enough time, would have cost around $500 because we rushed it and we didn't have enough time when we made our decision for me to receive the package from overseas. I had to buy locally and my meds cost me $1,500, which was not insurance reimbursable. But you want to know like the cost of the meds in the country that you're going to. And you want to know, you want to factor that into counting cost of the package too. And you can get meds, like if your clinic can send the prescription to a pharmacy like Fertility to you, then the meds will be like under control for expense. But if you have to buy locally in the USA, we'll do a separate video about how I got my meds because it turned into a disaster, which there are a lot of lessons learned and we could have saved a lot of money. But just be aware of the medication costs where you're going to and whether the medications for you or the donor are included in the package price, as well as the testing for yourself and your partner, who's going to be the sperm donor. You want to make sure that, like, if you have to do STD testing or like just all kinds of testing, is that part of the package or isn't it? And it wasn't included for us, and we had to get it locally, but it wasn't that expensive because we have insurance. So those are just all things to look at.
Yep.
That's how we decided which country to visit for our IVF. And that is part of our story.
Yeah.